Thank you, Hannah, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight. It is going to be a really important event because the probability perhaps, that Jeremy Corbyn will become the 55th Prime Minister of this country, the Prime Minister who will be in power on the 300th anniversary of that first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. This is a very serious and real possibility, and that's what we're debating tonight. The motion is about that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. It's not about is he a good or a bad leader. It is specifically, can you see him walking into number 10, and does he have the qualities that Prime Ministers require? Although, frankly, looking at the qualities of some of the 54 who have would have been his predecessors, you worry whether they had many of the qualities themselves. So we are going to be debating this. Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to be Prime Minister. And the first speaker for this motion is on my immediate right, Jacobson, novelist, journalist, best known perhaps for the Finkler question, which won him the 2010 Man Booker Prize, a prominent critic of Jeremy Corbyn, and in particular his handling of antisemitism in the Labour Party. Howard, would you like to be walking up as we go? Every speaker has a maximum of 10 minutes. Howard, that is now 9:59.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, something tells me you're expecting to hear me call Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite. There's been a bit about this in the press, and well, you know. But I'm not going to call him anything. He says he isn't an anti-Semite. Hamas says he isn't an anti-Semite. The white supremacist David Duke says he isn't an anti-Semite. And that's good enough for me. You might think I'm being ironical. Ladies and gentlemen, I am incapable of irony. We all know what an anti-Semite looks like. He wears jackboots, a swastika armband, and he shouts, "Juden raus." Jeremy Corbyn wears a British Home Stores vest under his shirt and is softly spoken. Anti-Semites accuse Jews of killing Jesus. Corbyn is an atheist and seems not to mind whether we did or we didn't. Whether that's because Jesus was Jewish and killing him meant one less Jew in the world is not for me to say. And he doesn't deny the Holocaust. Mind you, he knows a man who does. In fact, he knows a surprising number of men who do. That he denies ever having been in their company until photographs turn up of him rubbing noses with them at the gravesides of mass murderers, offering to show them his belief systems if they'll show him theirs. Gosh, they're almost the same size. Should come as no surprise. You can't spend your whole life in the company of blood libelers and Holocaust deniers and expect to remember them all by name. If I may quote from Oscar Wilde's missing play, The Self-Importance of Being Jeremy, to associate with one anti-Semite you don't know to be anti-Semitic, Mr. Corbyn, may be regarded as a misfortune. To associate with anti-Semites on a regular basis looks like a predilection. But look, when I think of the scoundrels I've hung around with, I know how easy it is to get people wrong, even when they turn up to meet you wearing hoods and holding burning crosses. And Jeremy, is it okay if I call him Jeremy, has never actually been what you could call observant. Take that mural he championed, showing bankers playing Monopoly on the naked backs of the world's oppressed. You and I, ladies and gentlemen, would look at those greedy, grasping, hooked-nosed, syphilitic, Zionistic financiers and recognize them at once as straight out of the Julius Streicher I Spy Book of Jews. But so innocent of anti-Semitic caricature is Jeremy that he didn't see anything remotely offensive. I didn't look closely, he explained later. How many times does he have to say that, for God's sake? I might have been there, but I don't think I was involved. I don't remember. I didn't look closely. If this reminds you of those who live downwind of the chimneys of Bergen-Belsen, claiming never to have smelt anything out of the ordinary, I say you have suspicious natures. Corbyn is a busy man. Busy men must take emotional shortcuts. There's an image of a blood-sucking Jew. It's identical to the image of the blood-sucking Jew I already carry in my head. Snap! Could there, I wonder, be such a thing as an inadvertent anti-Semite? Jeremy claims to be a peacemaker. A peacemaker brings warring parties together. Why then do we only ever see him taking Palestinians to tea? Could it be that he just can't remember to ask the Israelis? Bugger, I've forgotten to invite the Jews again. Unless, perish the thought, it isn't peace he wants after all, but the triumph of those he calls comrades and the destruction of those he doesn't. According to his supporters, Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have a racist bone in his body. Just a question, but what is a racist bone, and how do you know whether another person has one? There are 64 bones in the human arm alone. Can one be absolutely certain that Jeremy doesn't feel even the tiniest twinge of bone ache somewhere between the scapula and the humerus when he sees an alien figure, such as I, coming towards him on Islington Green, carrying the collected speeches of Benjamin Disraeli and humming My Yiddish Mama? And what are we to make, speaking of Corbyn's unconscious, of his inability ever to disavow anti-Semitism without reminding us of his lifelong opposition to all forms of racism? Which is like answering the question, are you a wife-beater, with the assurance that you always buy the big issue. Because anti-Semitism, ladies and gentlemen, isn't quite a racism. It's closer to a superstition, embedded in theology, shrouded in medieval irrationality, updated to suit leftist economics, and exhumed whenever a single explanation for all the evils of the world is sought. To talk of anti-Semitism as a racism is a contradiction in terms for Jeremy Corbyn, since in his eyes, Jews are neither downtrodden nor exploited, but are, as usurers, colonialists and conspirators, the very source and fount of racism themselves. Once hold Jews to be racist and Zionism a racist endeavor, then no anti-Semite can ever be a racist himself, and any definition that says otherwise must be amended. That's the psychology, now the science. Corbyn's political life has been determined by Newton's first law of inertia, which states that an object will stay at rest forever as long as nothing pushes or pulls on it. In physics, that something that might push or pull it is another object in motion. In socialist politics, it is a view contradictory to your own. Corbyn averts his face whenever he hears the word Jew and rolls his eyes whenever he is asked a question, because he fears the chaos, otherwise known as a change of mind, that might ensue from accepting there's another way of looking at the world. I will spend my remaining seconds, I don't mean in life, I mean of this speech, telling you why it matters to everyone, not just Jews, that a man so spiteful, sanctimonious, and obdurate should never be allowed to do to the country what he's doing to the party. Those who revere Corbyn see it as a virtue that he has never changed his views. Mr. Chairman, it is only a virtue to be faithful to one's views if those views are worth staying faithful to. To persist in a small erroneousness is the mark of a fool. To persist in a great erroneousness is the mark of a dangerous fool. The ideology in which Corbyn has been pickled for half a century was outworn before it even reached him. It oversaw the death of millions. That the ideologies he opposes have scarcely done any better is not an argument for his. You don't have to love the West to refuse the embraces of those whose sole ambition is to blow the West apart, especially if you wish to call yourself a pacifist. This should have been a golden summer for Labour. The nightmare that is Brexit, the hell that is Jacob Rees-Mogg, the out-of-season pantomime that is Boris Johnson. From all these, Labour ought to have delivered us. But Corbyn did as much as anyone to make Brexit happen with his feeble non-support for remaining. Do you remember that question? How much do you favour staying? 7.5%. That was one to get us to the barricades, was it not, ladies and gentlemen? The wrong man, ladies and gentlemen, the wrong man in the wrong time, espousing the wrong causes. I am nothing if not fair. People who are limited in everything but the pleasure they take in themselves are ten a penny in all political parties. They haunt the peripheries like ghosts of the Christmases they don't believe in past, backing losing causes, throwing tea parties for murderers, and looking saintly. Mr. Corbyn's misfortune was to be lifted from those peripheries and dumped haplessly in the centre. Ladies and gentlemen, not just for our sake, but for his, for theirs. Will someone please have pity and dump him back? Thank you.
Thank you, Howard, for that measured and calm introductory speech. Our first speaker against the motion is Chris Williamson, Labour MP for Derby North, a key ally of Jeremy Corbyn on the backbenches, described by the New Statesman, no less, during the 2017 general election as the most pro-Jeremy Corbyn candidate in England's most marginal constituency. This is Chris Williamson.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And unlike the previous speaker, I'm going to try and stick to the motion, and I aim to demonstrate that Jeremy Corbyn is indeed fit to be Prime Minister. But let me start by thanking Intelligence Squared for arranging this event. And I must say that when I joined the Labour Party as a 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer back in 1976, I never imagined speaking at such a highbrow event. Anyway, I'm sorry to say that I think Howard's indulging in a complete mischaracterization of Jeremy. In my opinion, Jeremy Corbyn will prove to be the best Prime Minister this country has ever had. Just look what he's achieved. Just look what he's achieved already. The Labour Party's membership has more than tripled since he was elected leader. In fact, Labour's membership's considerably higher than every other political party put together. But it's not just Labour's soaring membership that's impressive. He's restored hope to millions of people who'd given up on politics. And he's inspired young people in a way that we've never seen before. So what's his secret? Well, the truth is, it's pretty straightforward. Labour is now offering a real choice. Free market economics has failed millions of British people, and working class communities have been hardest hit. Thatcher's promise of a shareholding, property-owning democracy was a fantasy. But the confidence trick worked and delivered substantial electoral success. In fact, Thatcherism was so successful that it gave birth to Tony Blair and New Labour. Margaret Thatcher even said that Tony Blair and New Labour were her greatest achievements, because she said, we forced our opponents to change their minds. But that left millions of Britons politically homeless. Turnout at elections fell, while public cynicism about politics grew. Despite the financial crash 10 years ago, much of the political class and the mainstream media are still enthralled to neoliberalism. Neither are speaking to the needs of the country. For the last 4 decades, we've seen rising inequality. But the preceding 34 years, when inequality narrowed to such an extent that as a 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer in 1976, I was able to buy my own house. It was a brand new 3-bedroom, semi-detached house backing onto a nice waterfront in a desirable village 8 miles south of Derby. And it was only 3 times my annual wage. So another world is possible, but it requires political will. That's why Corbyn's message that he'll make a future Labour government work for the many, not the few, is resonating. Just look at the polls. There's never been an easier time to campaign for the Labour Party. Most people support the individual policies that Jeremy's promoting. And by way of evidence, Giles Brandreth went to Guildford, the capital of the home counties, looking for secret socialists. And he found plenty. He stopped people on the street and asked them if they supported things like higher taxes for people earning over £150,000. Oh, yes, I support that. Regulating the private rented sector. Oh, yes, that's a very good idea. Oh, I totally support that. Ending privatisation in the National Health Service. Well, I'm totally with you on that, they said. Scrapping tuition fees. Absolutely, about time. And clamping down on tax avoidance. Yes, we must definitely do that. There was almost universal support for those policies. And then Giles Brandreth turned his clipboard around and said, these are the policies of Jeremy Corbyn. There is mainstream popular support, therefore, for Jeremy's policy. The truth is that deregulation, privatisation, and the commodification of public services was disastrous. The one-dimensional obsession with financial services was wrong-headed too. And the absence of an industrial strategy has driven millions into low-paid, precarious employment. Working-class kids can't hope to replicate what I did as a 19-year-old apprentice. Our industrial heartlands have been abandoned, and people are searching for answers. The post-crash response has been hopeless and dangerous. QE, for example, actually exacerbated inequality. Even the right-wing Spectator magazine described it as the biggest transfer of wealth to the rich of any government policy in recent documented history. But the last 8 years of austerity has generated real resentment. Far-right populism is on the rise, fueled by poverty and insecurity. Meanwhile, the mainstream media perpetuate the politics of fear by scapegoating migrants, and that's then used to whip up racism. Political centrism offers nothing in these circumstances. It's just another name for free market status quo, and that ship has sailed. Just look at Italy, Greece, and even France, where Macron's poll ratings have plummeted. And this is a guy who models himself on Tony Blair, so there's no political salvation in that direction. But Corbyn's program for common sense socialism offers a populist antidote to the politics of fear. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party is the only traditional left-of-centre party in Europe that's prevented the drift of its core vote. Thanks to Jeremy Corbyn, Labour's answered the demands of those left-behind voters, not by scapegoating migrants, not by whipping up racism, and not by moral panics over crime or foreign enemies. Corbyn's Labour offers something better. Class politics is back on the agenda. But let there be no doubt who we're talking about when we say for the many, not the few, because that may be where some of Howard's anxieties lie. Labour's taking aim at an elite defined by their class perspective and nothing else. Those who speculate on our economy, who avoid paying tax, who profit from privatised utilities like gas, water, electricity, and the trains. And as for the debate about the IHRA examples of anti-Semitism, let me be clear. One of the reasons this has been a sticking point for Labour is because we genuinely care about the politics of anti-racism. And Jeremy Corbyn, yes, has been fighting racism all his life. The debate in Labour has been exclusively about preserving the right to speak up for Palestinians and to legitimately criticise the Israeli government. I want to say this. There are three voices in this debate, but we rarely hear from all three. First, there are the diverse voices in the Jewish community, many of whom have a strong and very understandable deep connection to Israel. Second, there's the Labour Party, which must write policy in the interests of the nation and according to the party's values. And third, there are the Palestinian people, who, let's be clear, were violently displaced when Israel was established. We cannot and we must not try to hide this fact just because we find it distasteful or uncomfortable. But Labour's policy towards Israel-Palestine conflict is for a two-state solution. It's not an attempt to reverse history, just like peace in Northern Ireland. In fact, peace in whatever form can only be achieved by dialogue. So let me return to the motion at hand. It might seem odd, but the 68-year-old Jeremy Corbyn has modernised Labour, making it fit to overcome the challenges facing the country. Our manifesto last year saw Labour's biggest increase in vote share since 1945. Over 80% of the British public support regulation of tax-avoiding digital tech giants like Amazon, Google and Facebook. 80% of the British public support raising the minimum wage, establishing a publicly owned national investment bank and borrowing to invest, polls at over 55%. These policies represent the new centre ground of British politics. They represent a direction that no other Labour leader was prepared to go before Corbyn, never mind another political party. We live in a country where the wealthiest 10% own 900 times more than the poorest 10%, and yet we're the 6th richest country on the planet. How can we let this go on? But let's talk about the man himself. There's so much said about him, it's hard to keep up. Apparently, he's a terrorist sympathizer, but he's also a pacifist. He's a weak leader, but he's also overbearing. He's a leader of a cult, but he's not charismatic. What I see in Jeremy, every time he stands at that dispatch box, even under the glare from both sides of the chamber, is a man with a strength of moral convictions. And yet, these convictions are far from dogmatic. The special thing about Jeremy is that he's a politician that listens. Everywhere you go with him is a complete nightmare. He speaks to everyone, and I mean he really speaks and he really listens. Is that not the character of a man who's fit to govern? Because what do we mean by governing? John McDonnell's fond of saying, when Labour goes into government, we all go into government. And Jeremy is above all a Democrat. He wants ordinary people to have a say in how their world is shaped. Isn't that refreshing? Is this not the attitude we need to heal a nation divided by 4 decades of neoliberalism and made worse by a government that's inflicted 8 years of counterproductive austerity? People on the left often say that at times of crisis we must choose socialism or barbarism. Well, today we have a similar choice: investment or austerity, dialogue or conflict, democracy or dogma. The choice today is between Corbyn's Labour or a Tory twilight zone.
Powerful and passionate from Chris, and brilliantly on time. You came in just as that clock said 10 minutes precisely. Anna Soubry is going to speak next for the motion. Coming up now to the podium, Conservative MP for Broxtowe in Nottinghamshire and former business minister until 2016, a prominent critic of Jeremy Corbyn. Anna thinks that Jeremy is a hard left Marxist. She's a key member of the People's Vote campaign for a referendum on the Brexit deal. Anna, you have your 10 minutes beginning now.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming along. What I'd like you first of all to do is to remember when you were back at school. Whichever school you may have gone to, I think it's almost impossible to imagine that you didn't have a head teacher. And throughout your lives, you will have had in your experiences times when you will have encountered, or it may have been you yourself, who has been a leader. So we have all had experiences of what we would expect to see in a leader, a good leader or a bad leader, or perhaps not so great leader. So what are the qualities that make a great leader? Because of course you need to have those qualities to be the most important leader in our country, which is to be our Prime Minister. I suggest, as you consider that, some of the following qualities: integrity, competence, an ability to inspire, an ability to be able to take decisions, an ability to have accountability in your leadership, to have courage, and most of all, perhaps, in the political field as a Prime Minister, to be successful. I listened with care to Chris's speech when he spoke in such glowing terms about Jeremy Corbyn, spectacularly forgetting, of course, that last June we had a general election. And whilst it's right that he won a few more seats, he spectacularly failed because he lost as leader of the Labour Party at a time when arguably it would have been the most easiest win of any general election because of the profound failings of my party when it went into that campaign, which, as you might imagine, I don't intend to dwell upon. And I really wish you hadn't applauded. Now, if you haven't been convinced by the magnificent speech of Howard over there, may I give you some other suggestions and ideas as to why Jeremy Corbyn is profoundly unfit to not only be our Prime Minister, but to be the leader of one of the most important political parties in the world. Even though it's a party I've obviously never been a member of, and I don't subscribe to and seek to fight, I nevertheless recognise what an important political party it is, and I know what it has meant for so many people in our history and in our country. One of the most peculiarly awful moments in the time that I've been in Parliament — I was elected in 2010, I'm an old criminal barrister, and I came into politics or returned quite later on in my life — was standing in Parliament Square, just down the road there, surrounded by members of the Jewish community who were staging a protest against antisemitism in their own party, the Labour Party. And I sat in Parliament listening to speeches from members of Parliament who were Jewish, who talked about anti-Semitism in their lives on a scale that they had never experienced before. But the most remarkable and most disturbing and distressing speeches were those from Labour Jewish MPs who talked about this rise in anti-Semitism from within their own party. And that is a party that Jeremy Corbyn has now led for, almost 3 years almost. He should be ashamed of what state he has taken that great political party into. And it's not just the Jewish MPs in the Labour Party who make complaint, it's the women too. Speak to women Labour MPs about the abuse that they have received during his tenure by members of their party, and in particular, the abuse they have suffered by supporters and from supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. And Howard rightly mentioned Brexit. I don't think Chris mentioned it at all. Astonishing, isn't it? The most important matter, issue, decision that our country has taken since the Second World War. And as Howard rightly identified, again, Corbyn spectacularly failed to lead his party, his people, his voters into making the right decision for our country by not just his lackluster performance, but by that 7.5 that he gave. And of course he said that, because he doesn't believe that we should have stayed or should remain within the European Union. We've heard from Chris about the return of the class struggle. He is the perfect embodiment of what has happened to the Labour Party, the return of the old, hard left. It's nothing new, I remember it from my days as a student. These are the people who are now back in charge. These are the people who are running the Labour Party. And on Brexit, this issue that dominates our politics, what do we see from the Labour Party? Where is the leadership? Where is the policies? None of these things exist. Dragging and screaming they were to accept a customs union. They still haven't embraced the merits of the single market because perversely and bizarrely, from this great party or this great leader that Chris eulogizes, who apparently believes in immigration, they still won't come out and make the positive case for immigration that must and should be made. I say to their eternal shame, they have shown no leadership. And what does that mean? What has that resulted in? And this is how I see it. Well, you could say the official opposition is a bunch of Tory backbenchers like me and some very brave moderates on the Labour Party side as well, who do our best to put some sanity and reason into this terrible crisis that our country will face if we don't get a good deal, or even better if we were to remain within the European Union. But God help us if we have that hard Brexit. What it means, in my opinion, is there are millions and millions of people in our country who believe that nobody speaks for them. They are good, sensible, moderate, tolerant people who have long occupied the centre ground of British political life. They have seen the Labour Party being taken over by the Marxists, the Trotskyists, the rabble that have existed on the extremes of politics for a long time. And Chris says these are the people, these hundreds of thousands that apparently Jeremy has brought back to the Labour Party. Well, I think Ed Miliband would say it was his £3 membership that had a bit to do with it. That's what Jeremy did. He took advantage of that. Now, I would agree only in this way. I think that Corbyn has inspired a section of our young people who understandably, in my view, were disenchanted, who are idealistic, who wanted to hear stuff perhaps they hadn't heard from main political classes for far too long. And I think he caught that mood. I think he rode that wave and he did it very well. But of course, as they now see what it really means, Corbyn's politics, as they now see and understand the antisemitism that has always run through the extreme left, I believe they are quite rightly turning away. So he's apparently got even more members into the Labour Party. This is his, it seems, only victory and success. Of course, Chris forgets and doesn't tell you about the 103 resignations from the Labour front bench during Jeremy Corbyn's tenure. And you know that within the Labour Party as it exists in Parliament, he has very little support amongst members of his own party who sit in Parliament. And I would argue that speaks volumes, because I don't want to play the man. I do want to talk about his policies, but I think the clock's against me. But what I would say is this. On all the big occasions, like yesterday when the Prime Minister stood up and talked about what had happened in Salisbury, on all the great occasions, Corbyn just can't do it. He just hasn't got the ability to say the sort of thing that you would expect from a credible leader of a major political party, especially the leader of the opposition. Ian Blackford, Vince Cable spoke better than he did yesterday. And even when he has a superb open goal, and some would say that my Prime Minister often stands in Parliament in front of that very wide open goal, spectacularly on every occasion he misses it. And why is that? Because he is somebody who has always been on the absolute fringes, carping from the sidelines. Somebody who probably the biggest decision of his life was what was going to be the vegetarian option at the Palestinian Solidarity meeting. I make light of it, but ladies and gentlemen, in my respectful submissions to you, there really is no debate, whichever way you cut it. This man is not fit to be our Prime Minister, never mind the leader of the Labour Party.
So thank you very much indeed, Anna, for that. I think we got the general drift there of what you thought about Jeremy Corbyn, which after all is the point of the debate. Now we're going to have against the motion and for Jeremy Corbyn, Ash Sarkar. Ash is senior editor at Novara Media, which, as I'm sure you know, is a left-leaning online news outlet where her work focuses on race, gender, class, and power. Ash, as you will shortly discover, is a prominent supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. Ash.
I'll keep it brief. What the fuck are we all doing here? I don't mean this in any philosophical sense. Real talk, what the hell are we all doing here? Love Island has finished, but that's still no excuse, really, to spend your evening in this way. I mean, it's my job to chat crap for a living, but if I'm being honest with you, I really hate these things. Us lot up on the stage, come here, we prowl around for our allotted 10 minutes, giving it the full Gordon Brown if we are able, telling you that Jeremy Corbyn is either the cause of or the solution to all your life's problems. And we gnaw over the greatest hits: Brexit, populism, foreign policy, antisemitism, civility, and then we put it in your hands, the audience, the demos, who paid between 15 and 30 quid for the privilege of voting, and we practice our faces for losing gracefully. We hope that we would be magnanimous in the event of victory. And then every single person in this room, every one of us, goes home with a comforting hum of self-satisfaction. For what we have done in this room is none other than the lofty business of politics itself, which is utter fraff, right? All we're doing in here, or even just around the corner in the Palace of Westminster, your place of work, mate, or in Broadcasting House, is trying to keep alive a collective delusion that politics resides in these approximations of the Oxford Union Debating Society. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn scares the bejesus out of so many people. Not because he is a Czech spy who moonlights as a member of Hezbollah, all while working undercover for the provisional IRA, of course, while at the same time, simultaneously, trying to do a hard Brexit and subvert the referendum outcome. It's because Corbyn, as leader of the Labour Party, is an expression of the social forces poised to change Britain on a scale which it hasn't seen since 1945. Because at its heart, the project of Corbynism is the building of power outside the hallowed halls of Westminster. It's about power in our neighborhoods, in our unions and our workplaces, our schools and our community centers, our social networks, both on and offline. I want to speak in this register, the register of movements. I want to speak, in Nye Bevan's words, the language of priorities. So, hands up, full disclosure, I am not a Labour Party member. Like, you know what's that saying about not wanting to be a member of any club that would have you in it? I go with that. My heart is with movement politics. They always have been. It's been that way in my family for generations. So my grandmother came here at the age of 17. She was greeted by teddy boys spitting bile at her. My mother, similarly, would often put her own 5'1" body in between London's black and brown youth and the racist police officers and or National Front members. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference between them. And neither of them had very much positive to say about the Labour Party. And this was in the age of what Anna calls the old left back in the 70s, which apparently is the same one that we've got now. They weren't any big fan of this old left. Many of the unions were hostile to Black and Asians participating in organizing with them, Often the same Labour councillors who are trying to organise events against the NF would be letting out their council properties for the NF to use at the same time, a gross act of hypocrisy in my mum and my grandmother's eyes. So they committed themselves wholesale to movement politics outside of the Labour Party. Though, funnily enough, both my mum and my grandmother have fond memories of a certain scruffy Haringey councillor, later MP for Islington North, joining them on the anti-apartheid picket line, and in my mum's case, supporting her campaign for specialist domestic violence services for women of colour. And it is in their tradition, the tradition of my mum and my grandma, that I am first and foremost an anti-racist activist. And it is for this reason that I say unequivocally that we must fight anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-black racism, xenophobia in the Labour Party and the left at large, tooth and nail. And we cannot in any way deny the fact that these issues exist on the left. And they exist on the left because the left exists in society. It takes some specific forms on the left, but it's essentially the same things that we see elsewhere. And any Corbo loyalist who's telling you that we don't have to do anti-racism in the Labour Party is missing the whole point of Corbyn's politics in their entirety. He has always been a dedicated anti-racist activist. And the women of my family knew something, and I think Corbyn, in his days as an activist, knew something too. That electoral politics alone cannot deliver substantial social change, like that anti-racist change which is so needed in our society. Indeed, as the slogan goes, there is no justice, there is just us. Skipping forward a few decades, we knew this in 2010. I was a student activist who, along with thousands of others up and down the country, responded to the betrayal of the Liberal Democrats and even woke Tories like Anna Soubry, who trebled the tuition fees by occupying our universities. Just down the road on Westminster Bridge, we were kettled, we were charged at with horses in the freezing cold. And there were only 2 MPs who came to see us during this time when we were sleeping on a cold university floor because the university administration had cut off the heating, eating cold hummus, which was quite crap, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. And they've never forgotten the debt that they owe to these social movements. They know that when they enter number 10, they're not going to be all that interested in parliamentary horse trading, meeting up with their opposite numbers, maybe trying to engineer some kind of parliamentary split to, I don't know, scrap over 6% of the votes like many centrist MPs. Instead, they will be meeting with people like disabled people against the cuts. They will be meeting with the families of people who've lost loved ones to police violence. They will be meeting with people directly affected by austerity and using their voices to guide the direction of policy in this country. That's social movement politics. The funny thing about both Howard and Anna's speeches is that they acknowledged that the summer should have really been an open goal for Labour. Polls haven't shifted very much. The awful, depressing thing about this anti-Semitism crisis is that there's not much cut-through to the rest of the British public. Everyone is deeply alienated and turned off from seeing the serious business of racism reduced to a cheap opportunity for political point scoring. I'm deeply depressed by it. I'm deeply depressed that for your powerful words against anti-Semitism, they were powerful, Anna, that you've had nothing to say about the crisis of Islamophobia within your own party. From figures such as Baroness Varsi, who has called for an inquiry and has been stonewalled at every turn. I also don't remember a great deal of criticism of your colleagues like Michael Fabricant sharing Islamophobic memes, and these memes are very similar to the form in which anti-Semitism takes. I don't agree with Howard that anti-Semitism is divorced from all other kinds of racism. I agree with Edward Said, who says that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are both nourished at the same source, nurtured by the same stream. I, as a Muslim, cannot be safe while my Jewish brothers and sisters are unsafe, and vice versa. So, I've got about a minute left. I'll probably end a bit sooner than that because I think the natives are getting a bit restless. I don't actually care about Jeremy Corbyn's personality. I mean, I think he's a nice enough guy. He reminds me of the Werther's original granddad. I care about us. I care about if we are ready for government. Because the Tories, they'd rather talk about personality than policy, because that's the terrain on which they lose. And it's up to us to keep the conversation on the issues that really affect us every day. It's not a question of whether we trust Jeremy Corbyn to be a fit prime minister when he walks into number 10. It's about whether we trust ourselves to walk in behind him. So, to paraphrase someone whose name I've forgotten, after tonight, catch up on the programs that you missed, and then go back into your neighborhoods and prepare for government.
So, Ash, passionate, also unconventional, quiet, I thought, understated beginning. I mean, why the fuck are we here, after all? Great, let's begin with just getting some movement amongst the panel. But before then, I do have the results, very hot off the press, from People's Democracy, and it is on the motion, is in fact, in truth, Jeremy Corbyn unfit to be Prime Minister? Well, apparently 66% of you think he is unfit, 13 think he's just fine, and 21% of you undecided. So we're going to take that vote again. I didn't go through the long rigmarole of reminding you of the procedure because most of you have been here before, but we're going to have another vote, and I'm going to read out that to see how people have shifted. The 21%, I'm going to say, we're going to be Australian here and say that you can't be undecided. You simply have to have a view. I mean, come on, why have you come out here? If you can't make up your mind whether he's fit or unfit, what are you doing here? Why didn't you watch Love Island? Because it's not on, but you could see it on iPlayer or something. So, you have to vote, and I'm going to want to see real movement there. And, okay, so let's just get Howard. I got the point, Howard, that you think Jeremy is a bit of an anti-Semite, but why does that make him unfit to be Prime Minister, given that most of the 54
How does being an anti-Semite make him unfit to be a Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the previous Prime Ministers,
I think your
many of them
have
been racists.
Have they?
Many previous Prime Ministers have been racist.
Well, I'll tell you something.
Fact.
Between ourselves, since no one is listening, I don't care that much either. I don't care that much. What I care is the lies that he spins to protect his anti-Semitism.
That's right.
What I cannot bear is this is a man pickled in sanctimony, pickled by his supporters in even further sanctimony. With this account of, I've fought racism all my life, what is that worth if the first time he's brought to a test, here is a problem of racism, how does he cope? He bottles it.
Yes.
He looks the other way. The whole description that we've had of Corbyn tonight is of a person we've never seen. Yesterday, upon the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He's a man who isn't there.
Is he there? Actress, is he there, and is he a liar?
Is Jeremy Corbyn a liar,
Yeah.
and is he there? The thing is, when you say, is he there, it's like you're asking me, is he there as some kind of proto-father figure? I mean, I think that this idea of Jeremy Corbyn as a totem onto which you project all your hopes, or indeed all your fears, all your anxieties, all your kind of bogeymen, is ridiculous. Is he there as a principled anti-racist who has voted in favour of anti-racist policy when people on this panel have not, who've stood by migrants, who've stood by people who've been victims of police violence? He's done all those things. That is a matter of fact and record. Do I think the Labour Party's been quick enough to respond to the anti-Semitism crisis? I think there's been a great deal of bureaucratic inertia, but I don't think that any other parties have done much better when tackling the worst problems in their own circles.
Okay, Chris, is he a liar? Because I would note that not telling lies is an absolutely necessary requirement for not not being Prime Minister?
Well, Jeremy is absolutely straight as a die, and you know, the notion of straight-talking, honest politics, which was the strapline in his leadership campaign, goes to the very heart of Jeremy Corbyn, absolutely. And indeed, you know, he is an anti-racist. He has stood up to all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. And what I get pretty annoyed about is how people conflate appalling anti-Semitic abuse online with Labour Party members and somehow hold Jeremy Corbyn responsible. The truth is, the Labour Party has done more than any political party to address anti-Semitism, far more than the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party is riddled with racism. And where is Anna, as Ash was pointing out, where is Anna in actually standing up to that? I'm afraid she's absent without leave.
So there's a couple of points to be taken up there. First of all, I was in the anti-Nazi League before Ash was even born. So I've been fighting racism all my life. Secondly, hang on, I didn't interrupt you. Secondly, I don't disagree. There are bound to be racists in the Conservative Party. But we're talking about the Labour Party, where there has been a rise in anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And you say not true, and you say rubbish, and I didn't interrupt you either, Mr. Williamson.
Okay, and we're not just going to talk
Jewish MPs who suffer anti-Semitism from Labour Party members.
Okay, Chris.
Well, there's been research on this,
enough.
And it's demonstrated that anti-Semitism in the Labour movement is actually lower than the country at large. And furthermore, anti-Semitism within the Labour movement and Labour supporters has actually reduced since Jeremy Corbyn became the leader. So for Anna, well, I'm sorry, well, look at the research. Look at the research. Don't be blinkered.
Okay.
Blinkered.
Now, clearly the audience is strongly agreeing with that. Anna, moving on from that one, is your party anti-Islamic?
Certainly not. Are
there no anti-Islamic people in the party?
I'm sure there are, as there are in all parties, because parties reflect, unfortunately, our society. Look, I'm the co-chair of the APPG for Muslims, British Muslims. And one of the things that we are looking at is the definition of Islamophobia, so that we now move to putting that into law. So Islamophobia, of course, is a problem in our society. And frankly, I think it's grown since we've had the referendum. I think intolerance and racism actually has grown, unfortunately, in our country since the referendum. Okay. And that's why we all need to come together and fight it together.
I'm going to ask you a question now about Europe. You have a choice. I'm going to give you a choice of two visions. You can either have Britain still in Europe, and there's a second referendum and we vote to remain in, or going with that is Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. Would you sooner be in Europe still with Jeremy Corbyn? Which would you sooner?
I've actually thought about this.
Okay, good. While you're carrying on thinking about that...
I've got an answer. The thing is, I don't want us to leave the European Union, but if we leave the European Union, at least we can go back. We won't go back on such good terms, but we can go back. It might take my daughter's generation to do it, but we can go back. If you get Jeremy Corbyn into number 10, God help our country, and you won't be able to get rid of him for 5 years. And the damage he will do will be even greater.
Well, let's take that very point, because Chris, you mentioned yourself that he's 68. In fact, he's 69. That means he might not be 73 till he goes in, and that means he might not be 78 till he comes out, 83 after another term. I mean, even Gladstone was only 82 and Churchill 80. I mean, that's getting on a bit, isn't it? We're talking about fitness here. Is he going to be fit? I mean, some people would say he's very fit now, but will he still be fit in office at that age?
Of course he will, and let's remember that 60 is the new 30 for a start, and Jeremy Corbyn is also bordering on a vegan, and the vegans are going to inherit the earth, so he's incredibly healthy. I don't think he drinks very much, and he is driven to actually create a better country, absolutely. So yes, of course he'll be fit enough, and he's got the energy. Indeed, Angela Eagle said, I don't know how he does it during the referendum campaign. He has the energy of a 25-year-old. Jeremy Corbyn did more than any leader of any political party to secure a Remain vote. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right when he said, when he gave the European Union 7 out of 10. Because I tell you what, the reason why the British people voted against the European Union, voted to come out, was because of the policies of the people like Anna Soubry, because it had abandoned whole swathes of our industrial heartland. It had abandoned working class communities, and they were sick to the back teeth of it, and they wanted something different. Now, I think they were misplaced their view, but that was the problem. It was absolutely not down to Jeremy Corbyn. And as I say, straight talking, honest politics, Jeremy tells it how he sees it. And he felt 7 out of 10 was the appropriate score to give the European Union, so he gave an honest answer. And he's being pilloried for telling the truth.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. We're just coming on to questions now, so let's have the lights up, and we're going to just see there. I wanted to get a moment of quiet consensus between both sides before we went into. We achieved that here, and we're going to have the first question. There is a lady in the front row. I want to see a second question. I want to go over on this side at the back. Yes, somebody over there is going to take the second question, please.
Right. This debate was about whether Jeremy Corbyn is fit or unfit to be Prime Minister. It has revolved an awful lot around anti-Semitism. 2 things. Why is my synagogue in the centre of London at Jewish New Year having to put up the sort of entrances that normally we see in airports? We've never had that before. And the increase in attacks on Jewish people has risen with Jeremy Corbyn. And if Jeremy Corbyn is so wonderful, why are you not streaks ahead in the point? And why, when he adopts the official definition of anti-Semitism, does he have to put a caveat on it?
Okay, so there's... you've spoken too much, panel, about anti-Semitism, but there, blow me down's a question on anti-Semitism. Question number 2, over there, please stand by. Question number 3, yes, come in too.
Chris, you said that Jeremy is a very good listener, but does he hear anything? Because I would love to see what evidence you can give of him changing his mind. Can you list the issues where he's changed his mind, be it Venezuela or whatever?
Okay, thank you. And question number 3 over there, can he listen? Yep.
I just want to say that I've been watching Jeremy Corbyn for many years. I've been to many of his meetings for 10 years. We've recorded him, and we know that he's an anti-Semite. We've heard him. We know that he supports Hezbollah. We know that he supports the IRA. And my question is, do the people of this country really want a prime minister who has that background and who lies about it, as Howard Jacobson said? He has told lie after lie after lie. Hezbollah are not his friends, he says. This man tells porkies, and he wants to run our country, and he wants to run it as a Marxist country. Is that what we need?
Okay, so thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you, that lady there, what is that lady? Let's go back. What is the worst single thing that you've heard him say? Can we have the question? Microphone back, please. Mic back to that lady there. I want to know very quickly the worst thing in 10 years that you've heard him say.
Jeremy Corbyn refers to Israel as a racist entity. That to me is the worst thing, that because what he's talking about, he's not talking about Israel, he's actually talking about Jews. Okay. Israel is a synonym for the Jewish people.
Thank you very much. Okay, right. Howard.
Do you want me to say the worst thing I've ever heard him say?
Yeah, go on.
You haven't got the time to hear the worst things he's ever said. But I thought when he said that Zionists have got, that's to say Jews, Zionists, they change around as it suits them, have got no sense of irony, and don't study history, tell that to Simon Sharma. And when he said that his actual words were, having lived in this country for a very long time, probably all their lives, they don't having lived in this country for a very long time, how to make a section of this country feel like aliens. the clothness of that ear that he does not hear, that you can say to people who have lived in this country for generations, oh, you've lived here, but you haven't got the part of it. I have never felt. And all the Jews I know all said, well, that really is the end of it.
Yeah,
whatever doubts we had before, that's the end of it. If you can talk about Jews like that, then there's no hope for him. And as for this... But I could also add the speech he gave on Iranian TV, because this is a man who made many appearances on Iranian TV and Russian TV. Those are all forgotten. The speech he made on Iranian TV to the Iranians who swear the destruction of Israel, he said, I think the BBC is a bit biased because they seem to think there is an argument to be made for the survival of Israel. The BBC is biased because he thinks there is an argument to be made for the survival of Israel, meaning I don't think there's an argument to be made for the survival of Israel. That's where he stands on Israel.
Okay, and got that. Thank you very much. I'm going to want to identify the people for the next batch. I'm going to bring in Ash for the responses to that. Does he listen? Is he, in fact, an anti-Semite? Again, I think we've answered that, but does it matter? Would he be capable in Downing Street of ruling in the interests of Jewish people, or would he discriminate against them?
I mean, I'd like to try and take some of these questions in one big bunch, because I think the one which went unremarked on was by the lady with the fabulous earrings about this rise in antisemitism and attacks on synagogues. But just quickly, in terms of Howard's talking about this joke, is that I think it was a clunky joke. It was a joke which was playing on more British than the British. But I find it funny that you found that indefensible, whereas you defended the healing power of Bernard Manning. You're on record saying this. You were, part of a documentary in which you were in the front row, laughing along as he was.
Absolutely not true.
So this is covered in the Telegraph.
Bernard Manning.
This is covered in the Telegraph.
I described Bernard Manning. That's what I did. I didn't defend him at all. You didn't watch carefully enough.
The same piece in the Telegraph said that in this Channel 4 documentary, which was in 1997, so I didn't watch it. I was 5 and I was really in Sesame Street around that time. Was that you were in the front row laughing along while he made awful jokes about Irish people, Jewish people, and also used the N-word. So this seems like a striking bit of hypocrisy. But one of the things that I would like to say, so I want to come back to your point about this escalation in anti-Semitism, because I think that this is something which we lose when we zero in on the Labour Party's internal processes, is that anti-Semitism particularly attacks on those who are seen as being culturally distinctive in some way, whether that's institutions or individuals, has gone hand in hand with Islamophobia. And at the same time, you've had an amplification of anti-Semitic harassment and hate online. I think that this needs to be dealt with by looking at how our culture reproduces hatred of those who are deemed to be other, who are deemed to be deviant, who are deemed to not belong here. The problem the problem with isolating... Wait, give me a chance to respond. Give me a chance to respond, because I did listen to you.
I'm going to say thank you very much. Can you please be quiet so that everyone else can get on with the debate? Thank you, Ash, for your response. I'm going to take 3 more questions, and I would really like not to have questions on anti-Semitism, because this is a bigger debate tonight than just, I'm saying very important, but there are, question number 1, go. Question number 1.
Thank you. Entertaining as it's been, can we maybe talk more in detail about the economic policies that Jeremy Corbyn has put?
Is he fit economically to run the country? Secondly, here.
Corbyn's mantra, for the many, not the few, is more suitable to a country like South Africa. In this country, the many are the middle class, the few are the downtrodden. So
the question...
he's the right politician, but in the wrong country.
All right, okay. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask Chris to come in first on that. And question number 3.
Well, as a partially Jewish person, I am absolutely appalled that this meeting tonight has been hijacked by the debate about anti-Semitism. I mean, frankly, we face, as has been said, this incredibly serious question about whether we leave Europe or not. It seems to me that has to be the main burden of what we should be talking about and which party, let alone whether Jeremy Corbyn is fit. And the fact is we are being so let down. And why is it? In fact, we know that the 48-52 result was absolutely outrageous for us to be taken forward on the basis of something called democracy in something so important. So why is this not being discussed in relation to who should lead the Labour Party?
And to be fair to Anna, she said it was the most important topic in the whole of national politics at the moment. Chris told me that his section on Europe, he didn't have time to come on. Take Europe, take the economy. Is Jeremy Corbyn fit to become Prime Minister later this year or any time in the next 3 or 4 years?
Well, obviously, I believe he is, clearly. And in terms of economic policies, look, we've had 4 decades of neoliberalism. It's been a total failure. It's completely failed whole swathes of our country. We've seen manufacturing jobs offshore to low-wage economies. We see people, millions of people in precarious employment. We see our public services being hived off to the private sector. We see our utilities going the same way. They're used as a cash cow. And we see industrial scale tax evasion and avoidance. And we absolutely have to clamp down on that. And we are saying that will be an end to neoliberalism. We will have an economy that does indeed work for the many, not the few. We will make sure that the tax evaders pay their way, that the faceless corporations actually pay their way and contribute to the public services and the education and the infrastructure that they rely upon. So yes, we are a party for the many, not the few. And as for it only, oh sorry, is that me?
I was going to say Europe.
Oh,
just
Europe.
just say a word on Europe, Chris.
Okay, well, Europe. Listen, on Europe, I campaigned night and day. I was up in the early hours of the morning on the 2 days prior to the vote to leaflet commuters. So I played my part and I spoke at numerous public meetings. We lost the vote. We cannot go back and have another vote. And I tell you what, if we were to go back, and I think it's incredibly irresponsible of anybody, from Anna to Chukaramuna, to constantly be calling into question the decision that was taken by the British people, as flawed as it might have been. Because a decision has now been taken, whether it be 52-48. That's how democracy works. And if we continue down this track, and if they were to be successful in getting another referendum, I fear we would lose it, but worse, it would, I think, precipitate an even worse postmodern 1930s crisis, a rise in the far right. We're seeing the influence of the far right in the Conservative Party already, and we would be precipitating a nightmare scenario. We need a people's Brexit. Let's focus on that and stop this piffle about calling for a people's vote in a second referendum. It's nonsense.
So no piffle, no nonsense. If Jeremy Corbyn had come out really strongly, given how effective he is, we've been hearing as a campaigner, if he'd come out really strongly for Remain, would the vote have been different?
Jeremy came out strongly for Remain. He did not do that. Well, let me tell you, isn't it odd how Nicola Sturgeon is hailed as a great conquering heroine who secured exactly the same percentage of SNP voters voting for Remain as Jeremy Corbyn did. It's absurd. It's another proxy war by the people who are obsessed with neoliberalism and this status quo, which has failed millions of British people.
If you were given 7, or if I said to you, if you said, will you mark my speech tonight? And I went, 7.
I'd be quite happy, Howard, if you gave me 7.
You wouldn't. You would. You'd want 10.
Well, I would, but I'd be happy if you gave me 10. If you gave me 7, Howard.
And between ourselves, I think you deserve 10.
Thank you.
For someone to have so few arguments and to be delivered them with such passion, I think it's fantastic.
Okay, Anna, it's piffle.
So what is Labour's policy? What's Chris's policy on Brexit? Because that's the most, the woman is right, that is the most important question because it reflects on Corbyn's leadership. Remember, Corbyn said we should trigger Article 50 the day after the EU referendum. Do you think that's a responsible leader to trigger Article 50 the day after the EU referendum? They have had no policy until they've been dragged screaming and kicking to a customs union. And the irony of it is Chris Williamson talks about the manufacturing sector Unless we have that frictionless trade and the single market, you will see hundreds of thousands of jobs will go in the manufacturing sector. So why isn't Labour standing up, as now increasingly trade unions are doing, calling for customs union, calling for the single market, calling for an economic outcome? And finally, on the people's vote, that is about the deal. And I think the people of this country do have a right, now we know more about what leave actually means, they do have a right to a say and a vote on a deal. And interestingly, the GMB came out in agreement with that, yet another trade union, who Labour's meant to be wedded to, seeing why it's so important that the deal goes back to the people so they decide, not 650 MPs.
Okay, just out of interest, hands up those people who would like a second referendum.
People's vote.
And hands down, hands up who still is in favour of Remain.
Oh, Remain.
Okay, good. So this is a very Brexit audience. We're going to take 3 more questions. Now, the questioners have to ask questions in no more than a sentence of 40 words. Now, I'm going to cut you off then, and we're going to pick those points up. Can the panel please note what they're saying when they're asking? And at this very moment here, there's final voting on the motion. Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to be Prime Minister. Let's take these 3 brilliant questions, because there are about 40 or 50 questions. These are brilliant questions. Question number 1. Let's go. Number 1. In you come.
All right, this is for Chris Williamson. About 5 or 6 times, sorry, I'll stand up.
Yeah.
You use the phrase neoliberalism.
Yeah.
I want to know exactly what you mean when you say that.
Got that? Good. Excellent. Number 2. Where is number 2? We're going to go straight through to number 3 over there.
I don't need to be lectured by Chris Williamson about anti-Semitism, but my question is, what government in any country over the last 50 years would you expect Jeremy Corbyn to most emulate? Any country, the last 50 years.
Venezuela.
Thank you very much. Marvellous. And this is the best question of all, coming in here from... Yes.
Can we have a question on the economy? It's for everybody, and particularly Chris. Command economies have failed in Russia and China. What you're proposing is to take central back command and control of our economy, and that has led to the utter disaster. So could you comment really on that?
Chris, you're much loved tonight. Everyone is wanting to spend. Chris is here, able to sign autographs. Ash, and picking up any points.
It sounds strange after this evening. I'm probably filled with more political optimism than I have been in a really long time. I think that whether you like him or not, hated, adored, never ignored, Jeremy Corbyn has been part of energizing political discussion in this country which we haven't seen for decades. As to what country he will probably emulate while in government, I think there are strong cases to look at Scandinavian social democracies, but ultimately, the changes that he wants to bring to the economy are ones that we haven't seen before, because we are facing economic crises that we haven't seen before. And the responses to those will have to be radical, and they will have to be creative. We'll have to look at how we distribute the abundance generated by the automation of labour. We'll have to look at how you can have a social housing programme which doesn't look like the big bureaucratic behemoths of the 60s and the 70s. How do you have housing co-ops on a mass scale? These are the kinds of questions that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party is dedicated to addressing. And alongside that progressive economic platform, you will have a renewed political culture of anti-racism. You cannot have anti-racism without that progressive economic platform. You cannot have a progressive economic platform without anti-racism. I'm really filled with a sense of hope as a young person who's locked out of the economy, who's locked out of the housing market, that Jeremy Corbyn and his team will be able to produce some concrete answers and solutions to the problems that otherwise, I think, are going to result in a nosedive in standards of living for the decades to come. We're already looking at stagnant and falling wages. You can look at Corbyn, the personality, as much as you want, but take a closer look at the policies, and I think let's have another discussion in a few weeks' time.
Thank you, Ash, very much indeed for that. Anna.
I'm old enough to remember when this country was described as the sick man of Europe. We then joined the European Union. We saw then our country become one of the most successful, fastest growing economies in the G7. That's why we have the jobs, the prosperity, record levels of employment. Now, I don't say that we don't face huge challenges. We know that. It's not just about Brexit. We've got to get it right when it comes to public expenditure so that we will make sure that we deliver the great services we need. We've got to make sure we have the aspiration amongst our young people and the opportunities they all deserve. These are huge challenges that our country faces. And what we get on offer from Jeremy Corbyn are the failed policies. There's nothing new about his economic policies in particular. And a number of you have already identified where in the world do you see any of those policies being put in today into operation? And the answer is Venezuela. That's about as near as it gets. These are bankrupt policies. They were bankrupt back in the 70s, and it's true today. And my final thing I will remind you, I asked you to look at the tests of any great leader: integrity, competence, the ability to inspire, decision-making, accountability, courage, and success. And I would argue, even if you don't buy the argument on anti-Semitism, look at all the other things that make up the man of Jeremy Corbyn, apply them to those tests, and I would argue he fails on every single one. He must be one of the most unfit people to be our Prime Minister that we've encountered in British politics. And he's certainly not leading the Labour Party, and I return to that message. Millions of decent, moderate, tolerant people in our country are unrepresented, and it's a scandal, and it must change, and he must go as part of that.
Okay. I don't know if you've been to Venezuela, but from now on, you're both going to be saying what country he most would represent if he became leader, and you have to have gone to that country. So, Chris,
Well, let me try and deal with some of the questions that were raised. And I was asked about my definition of neoliberalism. Basically, it's a deregulated market capitalism with a small state, which clearly hasn't worked. As for which countries we would kind of be similar to, I think kind of take your pick across Western Europe, really, in terms of the way in which they've conducted their economic affairs. And the point that was made about a command economy, what we're talking about is democratizing our economy, giving people a stake in our economy, making the economy work for ordinary people, giving young people a stake, giving young people hope, giving young people a career plan, making sure we can care for our elderly and disabled people, and rather than seeing them as some sort of burden or a way in which we could make money through the privatised social care system. And as for Anna's point about Britain being the sick man of Europe in the 1970s, yes, the 1970s definitely had its problems, but economic growth never, ever bettered anything that was achieved during that period. And furthermore, every single year from 1945 through to the introduction of neoliberalism saw a bigger and bigger proportion of the national income going to workers in their wage packets. So if we could replicate that once again, we could get back to the point where young apprentice bricklayers, like I was in 1979, could aspire to buy their own home again. Ash touched upon the challenge of automation. We're embarking upon the fourth industrial revolution. Are we seriously going to sit back and leave it to the neoliberals, or are we going to make sure that we use the benefits that will flow from the fourth industrial revolution? I remember being told to get ready for the leisure generation in the 1960s and 70s because automation was supposed to be meaning that we'd only work 10 or 15 hours a week. That is now a genuine, real possibility, but we need a Corbyn-led Labour government to make it happen.
For a moment, I thought Derek Hatton had come back.
For a moment, we had Derek. To explain who Derek Hatton is, I'm a young person. I wasn't around in the 70s myself.
The wonderful thing about hearing Chris Williamson is I now understand what happened. Did you know he runs a road show? He goes up and down the country doing this road show where you deselect people. I thought road shows were places where you chose a record on the beach, but apparently not. You go onto the beach, you choose somebody you'd like to select, and Chris Williams says, okay, I'll deselect them for you. On the grounds that deselection is such an important part of the Labour Party at the moment, I think the place Jeremy should go to learn a lesson is Israel. And he should talk to some Israelis, and maybe if the country is as apartheid as successfully apartheid as he says it is, which is total blather because it's not true in the slightest bit true. But since he thinks it is, maybe he can learn a few lessons then, because apartheid is what you're practicing in your country, in your party. You don't want any other voices. Anybody who speaks other than you, you deselect. You call that a Labour Party? When you think of the great tradition of the Labour Party, the wonderful, radical, moralistic, Christian, political, socialistic tradition from which the Labour Party has grown, those wonderful men of the 18th and 19th century, and it's come to this. You don't agree with us, you deselected. You should be ashamed of what you've done to your own once great party.
Howard, you've still got another 10 seconds. Can you do that gesture again?
You should be ashamed of what you've done to your once great party. I've got 14 seconds. I give those to Chris.
Chris.
Well, listen, our party is growing exponentially, and I'm absolutely proud of my party, proud of Jeremy Corbyn, and we're going to transform this country.
I'm sorry, everyone. It has been such a dull, quiet debate here. I've got now ringing in both my ears, severe tinnitus from these people, and been kicked under the table too. But I do have the result for you. And the result, I think, shows that we know why the we are here tonight. For the motion who these people think that he's unfit, and there are some 800 people here tonight. It was 66, and it has gone down. If that's a false fact, it's gone down to 85%. 85%. And against has also gone up from a 13% to 14%. Therefore, we can say that everyone's a winner.
No, we can't. We can't.
Everyone's a winner. But, Howard, what really I think is shameful is that there was apparently one person here tonight on the data I've got who didn't know, but I've also been told here that they thought they'd come to a wrong debate. They thought they'd come to a vegetarian society meeting tonight. So if you want to identify yourself, Hannah Kay here is in the front row and will refund your money so that you might come back again. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank you for being a spectacular panel.